I'd like to call to order the Parks and Trails Commission work session, February 20th, 2025. And we'll start with the roll call. Christensen here.
Anderson here.
Schmidt here.
Nybo here.
Streeler here.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, everybody.
Quite the crew.
And
I had a lot of names.
What? That was pretty good. Okay, South Fork Rush Creek Stream Restoration Project. Why don't you step up, tell your name and everything else.
Good evening. I'm Derek Ashe. I'm with the City of Maple Grove. I'm the Water Resources Engineer for the city. I've been with the city for about 6.5 years. Thank you for the invitation tonight. This is really nice. I think a part of this too is part of this project is funded through watershed funds, as you might be aware, and that's levied throughout
Recording
the entire
in progress.
Which includes portion of Corcoran. So appreciate your support on this project. I hope you enjoy it. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm always available.
Great, thank you.
And Derek, you came here because I'm the alternate on the Watershed Commission. And since Gunther left, I've been attending as many meetings as I can, unless I'm sick. And I saw Derek do this kind of jammed at the end of one of the watershed meetings. It felt like it got about this much of the time it deserved. And I just think it's a really, really cool project, and I thought that folks in Corcoran should know something about it.
Well, thanks. And the watershed is very supportive of doing these projects, which I think is really helpful. And they're mandated, so we have to be doing something at the end of the day. And so the more partnerships there are, I think the less burden on any one community, and that's been helpful to us here. So I'll go, and if you have any questions, please just stop me as I roll through this. I can give you the background and the timeline. These projects take a while to put together. So it's going to take 3 or 4 years from kind of the genesis of the project all the way to project completion. And it's going to be very similar to what we're doing on the South Fork Rush Creek. Typically, we start off with a feasibility study, which is going to identify the practices or the parts of the project we can put together in order to reach whatever the goals are. And so in the case of stream restorations like this, the goals are always going to be repairing erosion or trying to improve water quality or fish habitat or macroinvertebrate habitat. And these are all things that the state can potentially say are impaired in a stream. And if you're impaired, it doesn't meet the state standard, it's not of high enough quality, hence the mandates to do work and do improvements on these types of things. So we start with the feasibility study, which identifies a lot of these issues, identifies the reach of the creek, goes through where the status of the creek is, and what can be done to help improve the quality of the resource. And once we have that, we're able to work with the Elm Creek Watershed and try to put this into the capital improvement program, where the watershed will fund up to 25% the cost of a project, which is a big deal. There's certainly other sources of funding that we try to track down and have had success doing that in the past. Sometimes we have more success than others, but at the end of the day, working with the Elm Creek Watershed really helps support what we're trying to do here. And the watershed agreed to put this into their capital improvement program, fund a portion of the project, and we enter into a cooperative agreement with them, and then we start rolling.
Can I go back to what happened before December 2021? Was this a citizen-led request, or was it staff request, or did the state say you've got this bad waterway, fix it, or how did that happen?
Good question. So a couple things came together prior to December 2021. The state identified this reach of the creek as impaired for macroinvertebrates and for what we call fish IBI, which basically means it should have some level of fish in it, and it doesn't. So we knew back then it was impaired. That's a high-level analysis, but it's going to require some sort of project in the future going forward in order to mitigate for that impairment and return it to what we'll call a natural state. Also, downstream of this, we know that there are other impaired water bodies. So, yeah.
For my brain, is there a map that shows where we're talking about?
Oh, you can. If you want to go to the next one,
Just for.
I'll just show you the map. Yep.
Okay,
Here.
that helps me.
So this project is, I'll call it northeast of Mama G's a little bit. And it's north of 101st Avenue in Maple Grove and on this side of Interstate 94.
Okay.
And it's what we call the South Fork of Rush Creek, and a portion of Corcoran drains through this area too. So as it makes its way to the Mississippi River ultimately.
Thank you.
The length of the creek was just over 5,500 linear feet, which is just over a mile. Getting back to Tom's question about kind of the genesis of it, between residential development coming in, knowing we had this impairment, and having an opportunity to try to bring this capital improvement forward at that time, that's really where we got right before 2021. And one of the things we do try to do is do these projects before people live in the residential development, because the second you do that and you go into their backyard and start changing things, that's trouble. And you've maybe experienced that from time to time. So we want sort of the finished product when people are buying the home, and so it meets their expectations, and we don't have that, and they know what they're getting into. So hopefully that helps.
Yes.
So does the state have a list of impaired waterways, and I'm guessing other non-waterways?
Yes, and a map of it,
Yeah.
and there's thousands of impairments, and
Wow.
there's a lot of work to be done. There's progress being made, but there's a lot of work to be done to meet the state standards. Some water bodies will never meet the state standard, and there's gonna have to be a discussion at some point about how much money you're gonna actually spend trying to get a place you probably can't get to. But those conversations will end up being for another day. But yeah, so there's a lot of them. And it's not just creeks, but it's lakes, a lot of lakes and that kind of thing are impaired for various reasons.
And this property is city-owned?
It is now, correct. So during the platting process, when the residential development came in, developers are required to dedicate space to parks. So at that time, this is an obvious area they can't touch anyway, so that's got dedicated to the city. It's much more valuable to us than I think it is the developer, because we can do a stream restoration, and then I got some pictures too of the regional trail that goes across it. Eventually comes into, close to Corcoran, might be just north, but Three Rivers Park District has a regional trail that comes through here, and you might have that brain where that goes. So it's gonna be a nice segment when it's all said and done.
Super.
Do you mind going, thank you, back one
backward.
slide? Yeah, I'll get through the timeline and won't make this too long. But as the projects progress, and we enter into cooperative agreements for how some of this project is gonna be funded, we get into the design and the back and forth on that and a final design. That's gonna take several months. So we're kind of getting to the point where we're a year into this, but it takes several months to do that. We'll bid the project out and then award a contract, which we did back in July of 2023. Once that's awarded, we can really get started on the project. We had one additional item in here for an environmental assessment worksheet, which we needed to do. That, if you've been through those before and reviewed those, you're basically analyzing the project for any significant environmental impacts. But these are improvements at the end of the day, and they're somewhat mandated. So they always end up in a negative declaration, but it was a part of the process. Then we began construction in the winter. Oftentimes the winter is a good time, one, to start tree removals, and if you don't have too much frost, you can do a lot of dirt moving without creating a lot of natural resource problems and erosion and muddy mess and that type of thing. So we like doing them in the winter. They can be done in the summer too, but if you get the right conditions, the winter is oftentimes the best. And then for the rest of this project, once we started it, it will have substantial completion at the end of last fall timeframe, which basically means the grading work is done and the erosion control is in and everything is seeded, and all we're really waiting for is vegetation establishment. And now we're in this part of the process that's going to take a while. We can't snap our fingers and get the vegetation where we want it. It's going to take time. So we have a maintenance period on that of 2 years, so the contractor will come back for the next 2 years, spray for weeds, add more seed, prep it up, and then the end of 2026 timeframe, we would want to take it over and maintain it as the city. So hopefully that helps with some of that timeline. Okay.
And seeding is done to a state standard? It's also, I'm a Three River, I'm a Cohasset Park guy out on the prairie. And I'm wondering what it is, that restoration goes to what end?
We will use either a state-approved mix, MnDOT has mixes that are approved, and so does the Board of Water and Soil Resources. And it depends on, maybe whether it's riparian area or upland area or shady area. We might have things that we think work better,
Okay.
but we'll pick something that's state-approved. In this case, we took something that was state-approved and then doubled the wildflowers for a portion of this to enhance pollinator habitat. It was just a very easy thing to do while we were doing. There's a number of things that were easy to do while we had the space to do it. And our hope there is it's next to the trail, so it would be something that's very visible. The goal being, if you're on the trails and you're going through town and coming through Corcoran, this might be an area that looks different to you and hopefully looks nice. But you notice something that's different about coming through this area. There should be more wildflowers and grasses, potentially leading to more butterflies and bees and other things if you were to stop and take a look. And so we're hoping for a lot more biological diversity and use it as an educational tool at the same time. And it was easy to do it at the time. We didn't do it through the whole project, but next to the trail, we're really hoping for kind of a nice visual coming through. Some of the issues that came up in the feasibility study that we're trying to address are going to be this altered hydrology and habitat, really just volume of water and the changing of the land from agricultural to residential. And the agricultural has some drain tile in it, and so we're moving water a little faster, but the residential is going to hold it with stormwater ponding. And so things are going to change over time, but damage has been done to the system over the past, we'll say, 100 years. And so we're going to try to fix some of that. We're going to try to eliminate some excess sediment. Some of that's going to be from like banks sloughing off and eroding and falling in. Other sediment is what we call the bed load, which is completely normal for a stream, and we would champion the bed load. We want some sediment just coming along the bottom. There are microorganisms that'll use that and macroinvertebrates that use that, and that's fine. But in this case, there's just too much sediment, so we're going to try to eliminate that. Low dissolved oxygen resulted in these impairments for fish IBI and for macroinvertebrates, so we don't get enough biological diversity without the oxygen. Looks like us. These organisms need oxygen, and without it, they don't survive. So by adding some elements like riffles to the project, we can oxygenate the water and then encourage that development of those communities. Getting to the excess sediment as well, we'll have mass wasting of stream banks. And you may have seen this in other places too, but like large chunks of stream banks that just want to slough off. You get a heavier, it's just the erosive processes are going on. We have some pictures of that so you can get an idea of what mass wasting is. That actually adds a lot of tonnage of sediment into the stream and can create some issues. So we're going to try to eliminate that. And one of the biggest things was invasive species. So if you're familiar with buckthorn, which I think you are, and garlic mustard and reed canary grass, it was all over the place in there. It's a disturbed area to some degree, but of course it isn't maintained, and it's in that suburban developing area. So these things show up in those spaces, and so a lot of it in this area, it was very difficult to walk it before we did this project. You'd struggle to walk through the creek. You couldn't walk along the creek from top to bottom because of the amount of invasive species and really the buckthorn. It was really substantial. So we have a big maintenance effort coming forward after 2026. That's something that comes with these projects. You do a mile of stream at the end of the day. Now you have a mile to maintain too. But I think it's going to be important to protect it from going back to buckthorn and some other things. So we'll make those efforts. Okay. In order to address the issues, we'll repair erosion. We'll use a technique that we call toewood by taking some of the trees that come down with the project and reusing them in the project. We'll reconnect the floodplain to the stream channel, which is something that just gets lost over time as the channel becomes incised and wants to stay more channelized and spread out less. Talked about the enhanced pollinator habitat and the riffles a little bit. Really nice element is the bridge and trail. Hope you appreciate that. and then this invasive species management going forward. So a lot of elements in this. Okay, so these pictures are going to kind of wind through here as I talk, but you're going to see pictures of the creek before construction, and this is what a stream bank looks like that is undergoing some mass wasting. It's losing big chunks all at once. Nothing else is growing on it. The plants that are growing in the bank there are sloughed off from the top as the channel wants to erode. This all dumps into the creek and ends up getting washed away and washed downstream some. So we want to prevent that. It's creating some of the problems in the creek. You can see in this one was in the fall, so the buckthorn is still green on there. And as much as we love the trees and they can hold the soil in place, on a creek like this that gets a large volume of water, serves a big area, so to speak, there's too much water at this point, at the end of the day. And so the trees are great, and you can see the root systems can hold a lot of sediment, but there are cases where you end up with streams and trees alongside that just can't handle it. And some of those trees are big, so the bigger the tree, the farther away the stream probably was, and gave it a chance to grow, and now the stream has moved and taken the tree with it. So oftentimes it's hard to see it on an aerial photo, but we like to use the trees as an indicator maybe of how far the stream has moved over time. And so the bigger the trees, the longer they were there, so once they go, we think the stream has probably moved a pretty good distance over that period of time. So, all right.
Keep flipping through.
Yep, we go to the next one here. That's the banks. And this is a picture of what it looks like when we start to repair some of these stream banks. We have an opportunity to go in there and regrade them. We can add some rock and things to stabilize them. The design takes into account very specific elevations on what the model says this creek is going to bounce up to, how high these banks have to be. It's wildly precise on what we need to know when that happens in order to make sure that the creek just doesn't overflow the banks and blast through here and ruin everything that was constructed. And we had a very wet spring where we did receive in this area the 30-day, 100-year rainfall at one point. So we talk about the 100-year storm event being one storm event, right? Well, that same philosophy gets applied to a week and to a month. And for this area, that was over 15 inches of rain in a month, which is substantial. But it never came out of its banks and seemed to work great. So we were really happy with the design by Standet, who did the design. And surprised we didn't have a lot of repairs actually when we went back out there, because none of the vegetation is established, nothing is there to protect the soil if it reaches the banks. So this was a vulnerable place to be.
So Hiawatha Golf Course in Minneapolis, designed back in the 30s, and when it rains a lot, the water comes up high enough that it fills the golf course, and then the golf turf rots, and then it's floating. and you're saying that won't happen here because you've taken that into consideration and designed the stream to handle that
Right.
unusual volume of water.
And I would go so far to say it proved that it wouldn't happen this last spring. We got kind of lucky. Now, if we get 10 inches of rain in one storm, like all bets are off on some of this stuff. But that kind of a rain event is something that we would hope the design has taken into account and we can avoid it. Up to this 100-year anything. 1-year storm, 5-year storm, all that stuff. If it's a 100-year event, we want to make sure that the designs take that into account, or we'll be doing a lot of repairs. So it tends to look a lot better, I think, once you get the erosion control down. I think that's always a nice time to take a picture. It's kind of starting the cleanup process, and there it is. All right. The toewood that I had mentioned earlier, this is what it looks like on the design plan. And the toewood isn't those black areas, but the brown, if you can see the brown, and it looks like it's all mangled together. It's into the stream bank. And the nice part about, yep, right there. And the nice part about the toewood is when you mangle it all in the stream bank, it becomes very strong. And a lot of stream restorations, and what we're trying to do is move the highest velocity part of the stream, which would be on the outside bend, more to the middle of the channel where it can't erode the bank anymore. So we're literally trying to slow the water down on the outside bank with tow wood and push the fastest part into the middle of the creek where it can't do any damage, and then it protects it going forward. And Jessica, you can hit that again, and now it'll go through it. And you can start to see, I have some pictures in here of how we use tow wood. We used it to step down from this flared end section before it came into the creek, just trying to reuse the natural material. But there's going to be some good pictures in here. It's hard to see because there's a lot of water, but there's a few things poking out of the stream on the outside bend. And that's the tow wood. And what it's doing is it's slowing the water down in that area so it can't erode along the side of it. And it's pushing the highest velocity part of the stream back to the inside. And it's creating some riffles and some bubbles as it slows it down and forces that water to slow down in those areas. And because they're underwater, and there's a good picture of the tow wood kind of rammed up against the stream bank, because it's underwater, it doesn't decay as fast. So the longevity of tow wood is actually pretty good, even though it sits in the water. There's no oxygen to help it break down and rot. So it can last quite a long time. And that's a really good picture of kind of what it looks like under a lower stream condition where it's just a mangle of whatever. And plants will grow in there, and fish can use that as habitat. Over time, it's going to start to fill in a little bit with sediment, further protecting the bank. It'll capture some things as it comes in there. So it'll look different this year than it did even just last year, as it kind of matures and gets into its normal state. So tow wood is a kind of a cool tool, plus we can reuse the trees that had to be removed as a part of the project, so they don't have to be hauled away. It can save on costs. There's a number of reasons to do it.
So you placed all that wood, but would that be similar to a tree falling on the bank and then becoming tow wood?
Yeah, if it falls just right and can,
No, so
get
not
in
really.
there. Well, yeah, we'll reuse the trees that fall and we'll place them,
Yeah,
but we don't get quite lucky enough that they land in a nice spot where they.
I just mean like in nature, do we have this type of system? Like when, I was thinking when trees fall, that's how we would, how it happens without human intervention.
So I would say this tries to replicate what nature would want to do,
Yeah,
but it's somewhat like high powered, if you will, because the stream is not subjected to its natural condition anymore. It's subjected to development, ag, a lot of different things at this point. So in order to stabilize it, it's going to take a little bit more than what nature could do in the past, but that doesn't mean we won't try natural materials, if that makes sense.
mm-hmm.
So I think if you were to go somewhere undeveloped, unpopulated, yeah, the trees that fall can protect the bank. A lot of times they're not going to fall for a long time because there's just not enough erosive forces. They've found a great habitat to live in, and they can live a long life. But
So
in cases like this, it's a little different.
So that tow wood piece was put there.
Yeah,
How'd they make it stay there?
so they're about 8 to 10 feet long,
Mm-hmm.
and they jam it in there with a backhoe,
Oh, okay.
and they just push it in there. So in the wintertime, as long as there isn't too much frost, they can push that thing in there and set them in. So they're all about the same distance from the bank, and they can do a pretty good job with it. The contractor on this was Sunram Construction of Corcoran. So if you know them, they did it. I've had worked on a lot of projects with them, and their work product is phenomenal. So we were very happy when we got them because everything is done very well at the end of the day. And so, yeah, it's when you watch this happen, it's not surgical. Let's put it that way. It's blunt force instrument, and then later on it looks good. But the kids love it. So
'Cause it looks like just something that landed in the water and,
yeah,
very, well.
yeah.
I mean, 10 years ago, you would have brought big boulders in, right? Or
And we still do.
still do?
But yeah, the techniques have changed from just throwing rock at everything. These days, rock has its place, and we had rock in this project. But if we can use natural elements from an ecological perspective, they turn out to be much better. So And then we just can reuse material that's already on site. It just makes sense. It's kind of like recycling.
Cool.
All right. So this was a really interesting part of the project, something that never been a part of before, but trying to reconnect the floodplain in this area to the stream. So before the project, the creek continues to erode away and becomes incised, and it really will struggle to get out of its banks. The banks get steeper and more straight down. So as a part of the project, we smooth that out, and the banks are less steep, and of course the creek is much more accessible. But that gives us an opportunity to draw water off of the creek at the right elevations where there used to be historic floodplain, for instance. So instead of having just a linear waterway coming through here, we can let high water escape out into little wetland areas where it would have done that in the past. And so these were all constructed, and the wet spring gave us a great opportunity to like see these little pools of wetland and where some of this water could go. The biodiversity is different in the wetland area than it is in the creek. You're going to get some different things going on. So this just sort of doubles the ecological value of the creek. Never really been able to do this before. Some of the other projects I've worked on, we're going between homes and we don't have space, and we're trying to save so many trees, and we can't take trees down to build something like this. And so, but in this case, we had the space. We had this area is 14 acres in size. So being able to kind of blend that floodplain reconnectivity back into this project was something that was totally new to me, but looked really good actually when it was completed. So excited to see what happens this spring. Okay. Talked a little bit about the enhanced pollinator habitat. In the back right, you can see the new bridge is installed right under that townhome. And so I got some better pictures of the bridge, but the idea here was to put the enhanced pollinator habitat right next to the bridge to create something showy and different. So that's why we did it. It has just been seeded at this point, so nothing's growing, which was a bummer, but we'll see what happens in the spring. And then this area, not really a part of the project, but kind of a part of the project. It's adjacent to about 4 to 6 acres of a well-matured forest, 80-year-old forest, just to the left. Got a lot of buckthorn in it, but the DNR provided us a grant to restore the forest. So we can go in there and we're going to take the buckthorn out, probably take out ash, maybe like elm, some things that are susceptible to disease that we don't want in there, and plant some other things back in there, but then recreate this forest. One of the things that is hard to come by in a suburban environment is like a nice natural forest to walk through. It's like hard to find because the buckthorn takes over. And so this will give us a chance near the trail, and we threw some wood chips down and kind of will lead people back in there, and they can kind of go wherever they want, I suppose. But it'll give people a chance to experience at least 4 acres then of like a natural forest in a suburban area. So kind of right between our communities, right? Like our residents will be able to jump on the trail, and I don't know if they want to walk back there and whatever. Experience the forest, hopefully, is all they're doing. But I think at the end of the day, we don't get a lot of it, and so forest preservation was just, we kind of fell into it at the end of the day and took advantage of it. So we should be setting up a big burn pile this winter, and they should be taking this stuff down. Hopefully next week they burn the buckthorn and get some of that out of there, and then next spring we can plant trees back in there and start doing maintenance. So hoping it's really nice. We just kind of got lucky with that.
Is there any interest in, I mean, part of my yard was farm field until probably 70 years ago. And they just stopped farming it. And so then what comes in there, but it was box elder and some other pretty weedy sorts of trees. Well, now, the box elder is all gone.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's ash, but it's also cherry and basswood and some maples and some oaks. And so, but it is a long process. Is that, you're just gonna put in a climax forest, long-lived trees that no box elders gonna be you guys won't plant box elders?
No, actually, you're spot on because we'll put cherry, basswood, maple, oak if we can do it. They're a little harder to get going, but try to put that all back in what is already in that forest. And apparently, this also was an area that maybe had like apple trees because there's a couple of apple trees in there. So we're just gonna save those and see what happens because they could look nice in the spring. But if you were to look at aerial photos from 80 years ago, there's a few spotty trees, and now it's a forest. And so the oldest trees in there are pushing 100 years old at this point, which is a nice asset to keep, and it's an area that's probably worthless to most people. But if your parks, you know, and your public works and some of these places, you want these areas because you just don't get them all the time. So hoping for that excitement. And then here's some of the riffles that we put in. High water, so sometimes they're hard to see. I don't know if you can start this one over or not. Kind of ran away from me a little bit. But the riffles are just like a cobble placed across the bottom of the stream. And these are adding that dissolved oxygen to help keep the right amount of oxygen for the macroinvertebrates and the fish and to try to eliminate this impairment. And so there's a number of these where we've got cobble across the bottom and they kind of step the creek down. They're a little bit of grade control, but it's pretty flat in there, so we didn't need a lot of like what I'd call grade control as the creek goes from one end to the other. But they do add that nice babbling brook feature to it. So our expectation is that people will be able to walk off the trail and they'll just be able to walk like right up the creek if they want. I mean, it doesn't matter. And you can see the babbling brook and you kind of see how this is put together. And again, the hope is that it looks different than some of the other things that are around. We were out there last fall. We took the Maple Grove Lake Quality Commission out there, and there was already a number of butterflies had come into the area, and different insects had started to show up, and bees and things. And so those types of organisms are kind of starved for habitat a little bit, if you will. And so when they get a space like this, oftentimes they just glom onto it, which is why we're really hoping the pollinator habitat looks different. When I was in Plymouth, I did probably what amounted to a 400 square foot shoreline restoration in a park. It really wasn't much, but we put basically pollinator plants in there. And there happened to be a bench there. And by the time those started to bloom, the butterflies and the bees were all over the place in there. You felt kind of bad for them, like they had nowhere else to go. You know? But you could tell it was something that they valued. And so when I think of projects like these, I kind of think, you know, there's room here for something, which was kind of nice. And we're just taking advantage of something that kind of fell to us in some ways, right? The land was going to develop. We needed the park space anyway. We had this creek. Right? We just rolled with it and ended up with a mile-long stream, so we feel pretty good about that.
Nice.
Okay, thanks. And here's the bridge, and whenever this connects up and does its thing, we have the trails paved on either side of it, like into the development, over to the Hindu temple, if you know where that is all paved. I don't know Three Rivers trail plan, like when all these connections get made. I mean, you might have that in your head.
I don't know exactly what trail this is. If it's the Diamond Lake, or not the Diamond Lake, the Lake Independence Regional Trail, that flows
I don't know
through
what they
here,
call it.
but I don't think it's part of the Diamond Lake Regional Trail.
This stuff is oftentimes 20 years out. Like they know they want the land for it, but they don't want to build the trail until they have so many miles, is my understanding.
We're working through a cooperative agreement with them for
There
one
you
of
go.
the trails.
Yep, cooperative agreement. Yep, that's great. All about it. So it's good, and I think, but as these trails come together, there'll be a really nice segment all the way from Corcoran through Maple Grove and then over to the Elm Creek Park Reserve. Should be able to have all that connection eventually.
Okay, that trail is actually just north up in Rogers, what used to be Hassett
Oh, does
Township.
it? Okay.
Yeah. Just almost in Corcoran.
So it's close.
Yeah, it's close. We're gonna getting our own Three River Trail.
Yeah, just put a little stub in there and jump on.
Yeah.
So it'll be pretty nice. It'll be a long time coming. It'll feel like that, but when it's done, I really think that it'll be a unique trail. So that's the trail. Some of the details. The project is probably going to be about $2.5 million over 4 or 5 years, probably by the time we're done building things and getting everything squared away. I do want to go back in there, and there's some buckthorn that was just outside of the area that we were working, so I would like to go in there and clean some of that stuff up and maybe put some other plants in there so that we don't, I don't really want it next to this project, so.
Don't wreck it.
Right, yeah, don't wreck it, exactly, I don't wanna wreck it, get out of here. So, stay out. So, we'll try to do that. The funding partners are kinda up there, keep in mind, anything from the watershed is levied across the whole watershed, so every time you see watershed project, that includes Corcoran, and everybody else who's a part of the watershed, and the watersheds are great partners. We got some money from the Board of Water and Soil Resources through what they call their watershed-based implementation funding. Funny on this project, this is what's funny about this project. So this project is kind of popular compared to other projects that I do. Initially, Bowser turned us down for a grant. And we applied and told them we do all these great things, and they said no. And I was stunned. But they went a different direction. And after we kind of got going a little bit, then this funding became available. And Bowser was a lot more interested at that time, so we appreciated that. Because we'll take all the partners we can get. And then they ended up writing up a nice article on it as well. That went out kind of statewide to state partners. And then it just got published last week in a national magazine article, the APWA Reporter. Which is really nice and kind of combined the development with the project. But it was really nice to get that recognition. So I actually sent that over to Judy. She might have emailed that today to everybody. So you probably have a link in there to that. And then this DNR grant to do the forest part of it. Really inexpensive compared to the rest of it in order to get 4 acres of restoration, I think, at the end of the day. But feel really good about adding that in. So we're glad to do that. And then the tidbits on design engineer, Stantec, and local companies, Sunram, did the project, and they do a lot of great work. And then there's the funding. So thank you for supporting the project, really.
Yeah.
I mean that.
It's really cool.
So did Maple Grove provide any earth moving, any of that project, or as part of your public works department, or is that completely separate?
Completely separate. It's best to keep it separate. Getting 2 groups in there working on top of each other lends itself to, I think, some issues. If one of them has to own it, then it seems to go smoother at the end of the day. Yeah, for sure.
So how is this great project tied into the new 610 bridge? It's ending 610 and coming down to County Road 30, because that's all been chewed up and is being spit out in a little different format.
So that's a good question. So this is going to be just north of that.
Yep.
So the Lawndale Lane, which is the segment that runs north-south there, will come almost right into this project. So when that is done. And then the 610 extension runs south of that to the east and west. There is a segment of the South Fork of Rush Creek just south of this that I would also be interested in doing a restoration on. So I'm trying to get into Elm Creek CIP for that, but it'll have to wait for development. That one is going to be a little bit tricky because there are homes on the west side and it's ag on the east side, the development side. So the extent to which we can work with the homeowners remains to be seen. Just in my experience, the change is always difficult for the homeowner, and so we've got to see what we can do there. We're probably going to be limited. We're not that interested in, upsetting anybody or anything like that. But we do have the east side we can work on, which includes some city park property and a future trail possibly going through there. So we have some room to work. So it'd be nice to actually complete the segment.
Those homeowners own right up to the creek, or virtually to the
They
creek?
do. Their property lines are like the middle of the creek. Like it's platted that way. And so it's okay. I mean, we're happy to work with them, and if we can do something in there, we'll do something, and if they wanna pass, they can pass. But we'll have an opportunity to at least try, cause it's similar to this segment.
Hopefully they'll look at the work that you've done and say, you know, this is really good, it would enhance the value of our properties.
Yeah, they're either gonna go, that looks great, I love it, or they're gonna be like, are you kidding me? So it'll go one way or the other.
Yeah, for sure.
But one other technique we can do too, instead of like removing trees completely, is just to try to trim them up. Like, we need the sun is the problem, right? At the end of the day, I need the sun so we can grow some of the plants. And sometimes trimming the trees might be enough to help make that work, and then they can keep the tree. And so maybe there's a compromise there. But we're always happy to take out, you know, ash and things that might be susceptible to disease anyway, and save them $5,000 on that removal. So we'll see. That's the next one.
Cool.
It's
Nice.
really cool.
There it is.
The funding, so the city of Maple Grove, is that coming from their parks fund, do you know?
No.
No, okay.
Should though, don't you think?
I-
That
Good to
comes
know
from, so we have a, I'm not sure if you have it here, we have a surface water utility fee, stormwater fee. And so our contributions will generally come from that fund. And then we also have trunk storm sewer fees that have been collected over time. So as properties have developed, they've been assessed trunk storm sewer so that we can drain the yards and the roads at some point, so that we have funding there to do these stream restorations as well if they're big enough. So trunk storm funds don't last for forever, that's limited. People pay that one time, and then after that, any maintenance, upgrades, repairs can't be funded from that. So you can get that one time. So we couldn't do maintenance with that fund. We'll use our stormwater fee for that at this point.
And then how does the watershed get their money? Tom, you probably know that too.
Yeah, so they do like they call it an ad valorem levy. So they'll hold a public hearing in September of each year for whatever projects they want to levy for. And then they make a request of Hennepin County to levy those funds on people's property taxes. So they can't do it directly, but they can make the request. And Hennepin County's never refused the request. So.
Is that something that then they would vote on? Like, it would go to vote, or no, it's just?
Yep, they'll
Never
vote on
bother
it,
levy.
and yeah, it's all part of truth in taxation. So if you look on your property tax bill, there's other taxing districts or special taxing districts. It's in there. And in there is like, probably Met Council is in there, Three Rivers is in there, the watershed is in there, and you'll see what you pay individually to the watershed. In Elm, it might be $10 a year,
Yeah,
something like that in the levy.
interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Other
There
questions?
you go.
Now, we've got a creek in Corcoran, the one that runs through City Park. It looks a lot like the before picture.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the way, I mean, that's just it's just the natural way things have gone, you know? I
Yeah.
mean,
And
there's a lot of
Sunram
them
lives
like
right
that.
across from that creek.
That's
Must be
right.
driving him crazy,
There we
huh?
go.
Yeah. Yeah, gotta get with the watershed, start rolling.
So this just happens to our creeks over time because of invasive species and construction?
Yeah, and I would just say, like, if you wanna, like, simplify it down to, the creeks are not in there, the watershed is no longer natural for what the creek developed in originally, for just people living here and whatever, you know? And so ag practices and development all changes that. What we end up with is more volume of water being pushed into the creek faster, and then that's what causes it. And then once things start to erode and the soil becomes exposed, the invasive
Plants die off,
species
yeah.
take off, yeah,
Okay.
so.
How do you remove the buckthorn? You pull it, or do you cut it and treat it?
In this case, we cut it all down, but
Doesn't it grow back?
it will. So
Okay.
now we gotta go back in, and we're gonna have to be treating it going forward, and it's gonna be a battle, cause it was so thick in there. So we know that's coming, I mean, hopefully over time, it's just not that big of a deal, but we'll probably be out there twice a year, up and down, seeding, knocking back invasive species, keeping things from taking off, and eventually want to be in a good place where we don't have to do quite as much maintenance, but we'll be very cautious not to let it get away from us as well.
Is there ever any concern that the new development, like the homes, say fertilizer from the yard runoff, will impact the species or the ecology of the stream?
Yeah, yeah, so.
Anything they do about it, or
Um,
probably not much you can do?
yeah. It's a great question, because yes, the development's gonna drive more, what we'll call pollutants into the stream, and we have to combat it. Now, the development has stormwater ponding and filtration systems that are designed to clean that water before it gets there. So in theory, you've knocked that back more than it's coming forward. Some of the pollutants that we would be concerned, like geese would be one of the things that we might have to battle. We don't need goose poop out there, but this is the kind of area that geese would like. Grass clippings in the street would be another phosphorus laden thing. Just keeping those on the yard, it can be huge. But we do have significant buffer out here. Like with 14 acres, we have a big space. So we're not expecting a lot of pollutants to be able to find their way across the ground. But it's going to be, to your point, I think what goes into the pond and what comes out of the pond at the end of the day is going to come right into the creek.
So we should have fish in there soon then.
Yeah.
If I go drop a line,
Check it
you
out in
think
the
that
spring.
next couple years?
Coming up, yeah, for sure.
Right from the bridge.
Yeah,
Right.
There we go.
It's an interesting
bring the
creek
kids,
because
yeah.
the 2 Octobers earlier, the last October, I can't remember when it was completely dry. And we had been in a drought and we walked the creek, literally
Literally.
the bottom of the creek. And so it was very easy to walk because there was no buckthorn in the water. But there's a lot of appliances,
Oh.
tires. There's a lot. I
Where
mean,
did
after
those come
100 years, there's just a lot in there. But with these projects, we take that stuff out too, and kind of clean it up a little bit. But it's interesting.
Part of the rural character that used to be Maple Grove.
Yeah, engines and things. So, but it's nice to get that stuff out of there too. So.
Yeah.
Was all of this probably big woods back before Europeans got here?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I think the maps might suggest that it could have been like big woods. I don't think anybody would know for sure. You know, some of the first things that happened were the trees went down, right? So, I don't know about the big woods, but and the stand that we're trying to protect isn't big woods. It's
Okay,
not
it's too
anything.
new.
Yeah, it's too new. But as far as a mature forest, it'll be one of the more mature forests in the area. You know, a stand forest that big. So it's nice to have it.
So you go into that big woods and cut down all the buckthorn and leave the good stuff?
Yeah.
I mean, it's gotta be hard. Hard project.
Yeah, so, yeah, I don't have to do it myself, so. It will be a hard project, and we'll replant species. We think we're gonna end up with some voids in the canopy by the time we're done taking down the ash and the buckthorn. So that's why we're gonna come back and plant in a few dozen trees back in to fill that canopy back up. But yeah, I suspect the larger buckthorn, some of them 6 inches in diameter maybe, like they're old school buckthorn, those will get hacked off and burned on the burn pile. The rest of it can be mowed with a forestry mower. I think anything less than 4 inches technically can be mowed with a forestry mower. So they'll be able to mash that up, but we'll run into the same problem. The buckthorn's gonna be growing back up in a year, and so we're gonna be out there doing maintenance for a while. Yeah, anytime, I mean, one takeaway is anytime you do something like this, you gotta plan on, you're in it for the long haul and the maintenance. It'd just be a shame for it to revert back to a state where it needs huge fix.
You sort of assume that your beautiful prairie is gonna have a fair number of thistles in there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, as soon as you turn the dirt over, right, the invasives want to be the first thing that grows, and so we'll get all kinds of stuff in there.
I heard that quaking aspen can outcompete sometimes the
Really?
invasives, yeah, so.
to know.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
Just fixed the project for you.
Making Aspen section over
Don't worry
here.
about it, it'll all die off on the
Yep.
basis, yeah,
Yep.
plant a few.
That's a good tip, for sure.
Oh,
Well, thank you for everything.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the invitation and having me out. I hope you like it. You know, it's a Corcoran project too, so appreciate all the support on it and appreciate your work at the watershed and
He still wants someone to fill in
We're
his
still-
spot
yeah,
if
yeah.
anyone's interested.
look at all the fun we have.
We're all thinking about it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Derek.
thank you all very much.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate you.
Thank
Have
you.
a good night.
I
Jill.
do need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Need a second.
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right,
Aye.
and motion passes. Meeting adjourned.